Hi, this is John with Fix It Planet. Today we're going to do this Galaxy S8 Plus. It has a busted screen. You can see there, and it's also, the frame is all dented up, nicked up. So we're going to do the screen and the frame on this particular repair. So we're just going to plug it in real quick, take a quick look. You can see the screen is out on it. So we're going to replace the entire display assembly. Under here you've got your fingerprint reader. This cable runs over here and plugs in about right there. So be careful of that. Now, since I don't have a friend today to help me put this pick in, I've pulled it with a suction cup. We actually preheated it on a hot plate and pulled it really good with a suction cup and just got a little bit of gap started. But since I have no friend to help put that pick in today, we're just going to use a little bit of help with this metal tool to get this pick in there. Now, I've also got a pretty bad cut on the end of my index finger, and that's going to make things a little bit hard for me. So we're going to warm it up a little bit more with the heat gun, and we're going to use this pick to get the back off. I was having some trouble with my index finger, so if I make any mistakes, I'll just blame it on that, because I can hardly use my hand properly without my index finger there. And sorry to say, but I did bleed a little bit. There we go. Got a little bit of blood in there because I tried to push a little bit with that finger, and it's got a big cut. So let's clean up the mess a little bit here and see if we can do the rest of this without the index finger. It's not going to make this any easier. So as I've pointed out in a previous video, getting the back off is probably the most difficult part. The S8 Plus also, you do have a risk of breaking the back glass trying to get it off, so you want to kind of take your time, be careful of that. So we're going to heat it up some more here with this hot air gun. Keep working around the edges. Now, this, just like the S8, has an outer, on the outer edge it has adhesive, and then there's a little more, that adhesive is just on the edge, and then there's a little bit more adhesive further inside. There's an NFC antenna, so you want to watch out that you don't tear that NFC antenna. And as I've mentioned in other videos, if you get a little nick in the side, that's probably okay, but if you tear that NFC antenna, you will have to replace it. Now, if we are lucky, we can get this off of here without doing any damage to the adhesive around the edges, but as we'll see later on in the video, the very bottom, we didn't get that lucky. So we are going to have to put a fresh piece down on the bottom, but everything else came out fine. So in the whole process, this little bit right here is the part that this is the piece here that we're going to have to snip that, and then we're going to add another little piece in before we put the back on. Now, right in here, you should be able to begin to see the fingerprint sensor cable, little pop connector right there, and that's where it plugs in. There's the cable right there. So as you can see, we've torn all this up at the bottom here, so we are going to want to replace that. Sometimes you can just sort of straighten it out and flatten it back out and kind of get it back into position, and you can maybe get away with it. This one, it was okay. It wasn't great. I mean, it would probably still work, but we're going to have to snip a little bit off here for it to sit right, and then we're going to put another piece down there on the bottom before we put it back on. Everything else looks good though. Here's your fingerprint sensor. And there's the back. Everything's good there except for that little bit at the bottom. We'll have to put some fresh adhesive on. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is different than the S8 because we are going to replace the entire frame assembly as well as the display. Now, that all sells as one piece, so you can buy it all together as one piece. We'll take these screws out first. And just like in the previous video, we've got some caps here that we're going to take off that fit together a little bit like a puzzle. And they'll come off with the NFC antenna. So the NFC antenna's got a little bit of sticky stuff on either side of it. And we're just going to separate that from the battery and everything so that it doesn't accidentally tear when we go to remove these caps. This last screw, they're all exactly the same. So we're just going to get a little bit of this sticky stuff loosened up on the NFC antenna to free it up so it doesn't get snagged on anything or caught on anything as we begin to remove these plastic caps. And they're just snapped in around the edges. Now, one thing I want to mention, and this is something I've seen in some other videos, is that the last thing you really want to do is take a metal tool and start digging in underneath these things and to try and remove them. So you really want to be careful what you're putting in under there and how far you're putting it in, because you could very easily knock off a component on the motherboard. These fit together just like this little puzzle. We're going to set those to the side, get them out of our way. Now the battery is connected here. We're going to go ahead and remove that connector first before we do anything else, and this time we're going to remember to take out the SIM card tray before we go any further. So we'll be able to remove the motherboard without any problem. So we're going to leave these, some of these connectors we're going to leave in place, some of them we're going to remove, but we're going to have to take everything out and transfer it over to the new housing. So we can leave the cameras connected, but we're going to need to disconnect some of these other connectors, as well as these antennas. And the motherboard here has another little antenna there that's connected. And this motherboard has got a pop connector that attaches it to the lower charging dock assembly, and that is the motherboard. Everything is in place. We'll set that to the side. This is your vibrator here. Now I'm going to show side by side the new frame assembly. So what's going to happen is we're going to take that vibrator, we're going to put it here, And likewise, we're going to take all of this here and put it all over here, and essentially go around and transfer all of the components. This area here, this cable here, all of that's got to come back over here and get put into place. These are the sensors. We'll also be taking the battery. We've got some other stuff there that we need to transfer from the charging dock assembly. It's got some cabling that runs along the inner side of the housing. So we're going to remove any masking from the the battery there. It's going to go back in here. So as you can see, all of those items are going to be transferred over to the new housing. And we've removed all the masking from the housing, so we're just going to set it to the side now. We're going to go ahead and get started removing this lower charging dock assembly. Just has a few screws. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 screws. And they're all the same. Now this is the headphone jack connector. We're going to go ahead and get these antennas and just get them out of our way. You can leave them connected or you can take them off, whichever you prefer. They're just going to be in my way, so I'm going to go ahead and remove them. Just remember where they go. One is a little bit longer than the other one, so that might help you to remember. Now, the heat gun is just going to be used for a few seconds, not long at all, because we don't want to do any damage to the battery. So you do not want to put a heat gun on a battery and leave it on there for an extended period of time, or you will cause some serious damage, maybe even start a fire. So you can see just inside the housing, right along the edge here, is a little cable that has to come out, and this is going to be delicate, so you want to be careful not to tear it. It fits just inside there, and it does have a little bit of sticky stuff on there, so that's the reason we use the heat gun, just to warm it up a little bit, make it a little bit easier. You got a microphone there. And we'll be able to get under it with our spudger. Again, you want to be careful where you're putting your tools. Pay close attention so that you're not doing damage to the motherboard or any other component. That just sort of lifts right on out of there. This piece is a separate piece altogether. And there's your charging dock. So if you were going to replace the charging dock, this is what you would do to get it out, and you would put the new one in, as you'll see later on in the video. Now we're going to go ahead and get this vibrator out of here, and we'll get the battery out last. Now you could replace the screen just much like we do in the S8 video, but in this case we're going to replace the entire housing, display assembly, everything all at once. So we'll just be transferring all of the components from the phone over to the new housing. So a slightly different approach to this repair. Now we just have these sensors over here, They're also kind of stuck down a little bit. We're just going to warm that up just a tad. We're going to leave this copper tape on it and just peel it up. Okay, so we'll leave that with the little sensor assembly there. Sensor and a flash, I believe. Now with the battery, it's going to be a little bit interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of alcohol. We want to get this battery out, and we absolutely do not want to do any damage to this battery. We want this battery to be perfect. So what we're going to do first is we're going to put a little bit of alcohol down inside the battery, behind it, and what that's going to do is help break down some of the adhesive that's holding that battery in place. That's going to help break it down. So we'll just kind of move it around a little bit, let that alcohol soak in. And then what's going to end up happening is we're going to put a little pick inside here, and we're going to be able to pull this battery out. And one of the things that you missed there is that after the battery had time to, the alcohol had time to soak, we put it on a hot plate as well. So this is not real time. That is actually a cut you missed. I mean, because we're not going to sit here for 10 or 15 minutes or however long. We want to let the battery soak in the alcohol and then put it on a hot plate for a few minutes to warm it up. So keep that in mind. We did skip that. So that's it. That comes out perfect, no damage, and can easily be put back in. And that's what we want. Set it to the side. So now we've got our new display assembly and frame and housing and everything. We're ready to put all of our parts that we took out in, and we'll just kind of go in reverse, and we'll start with the battery. We're going to put some fresh adhesive down so that battery won't move around on us. So we're just going to put it on the metal part of the housing, not on the actual display, which is exposed there. That black bit that you can see in the middle there is the actual display assembly. So we really don't want to mess with that. We'll take the masking off of that adhesive, and we'll be able to lay the battery back in its place. Now we'll work on this charging dock, and it basically is just going to go back in the same way that it came out, in reverse. So we're going to be gentle and careful with it so that we're not knocking components off. Make sure that it is seated properly down inside there, and make sure that this cable is back up inside the side of the housing there where it came from. We're going to go ahead and put our headphone jack. Now this little piece here, it is supposed to stick out, so be sure you don't break it off. That just snaps back into position, no problem. Little pop connector goes right back in, and we've got our 5 screws, I think. What is it, 5? Is it 5 or 6? I think it's 5. I'm going to put those screws back. Actually, it is 6. No, it is 5. See, I almost started to put another screw in the wrong place. 5 screws, including the one for the headphone jack. Okay, so if you were replacing the charging dock assembly, you would be done and ready to put this thing back together. So we're going to put the vibrator now back in its little spot. We're going to put our flash and our sensors back where they go. So I had to get a new band-aid at some point during this video too, so I wasn't bleeding all over the phone. Now we're going to put our antennas back. Make sure that you put them back through the little channels that they go in, so that they'll be right back where they originally came from, in the same sort of orientation. Now we can put our motherboard back into place. That would be the main logic board, I guess, if you prefer. And we want to line it up down here so we can get it in its pop connector to the charging dock assembly there. Snap it down and go ahead and get our antennas hooked up to that board. Reconnect all of our other connections. Now, in some cases, to test the screen, you may need to put your plastic caps back into position. There is something else I want to point out here. We're right there where I just pointed. Down inside here, this is actually capped off. So the new assembly, the new frame, the new housing, all of that actually comes capped off already, so the piece that would normally be there does not need to be transferred from the old one. But in some cases, I was getting ready to say that you may need to put these caps back into position in order to test it properly for battery issues or whatever. So you may get some error messages, maybe the temperature error messages or something like that with the battery, if these pieces are not in place. So if you're running into that situation, just put these guys back into position and make sure that they're at least screwed down a little bit so they're making contact, and that should eliminate that issue. So we're going to go ahead and put all the screws back in. Now in this particular video, I just skipped testing it in the video. I've already tested the screen, so I know it's good. So we're going to move right along. Now, one other thing I'll mention is that the new housing has where all the screws go. Those threads can easily be cross-threaded. So if you put that screw in at an angle and it doesn't want to go down, you need to stop and back off. Back it out and start over again and make sure that screw is absolutely going in straight up and down, so you don't cross thread and mess up those threads and screws. Make sure everything is snapped in all the way. Okay, so we put another layer of fresh adhesive. Mine's clear, behind the original adhesive on this thing. And now we're going to try and see if you guys can see what's going on here. We want to get this pop connector back into its position. I can't get my fingers down in there to do it, so we're going to use our spudger. Once I think it's seated properly, we'll go back in and check it with another finger and make sure it is seated all the way down, because we don't want to take this back off again. Once it's on, it is going to be stuck down good. So we have put some fresh adhesive down at the bottom and overlapped it so that any areas that may have had a gap are not going to have any adverse effects. Now we have the new frame and everything, no more dents. That does not mean that this phone is waterproof. It may be water resistant, but it is not waterproof. It would not submerge this in a bathtub or a toilet or a swimming pool to see how waterproof it is. That question comes up all the time. Is it still waterproof? If it's cracked, it's not waterproof anymore anyway. So you can either have a cracked phone that's not waterproof, or you can replace it with new and fresh adhesive and it will be water resistant, but not to factory specifications. So when we're only at 1%, we needed to let it charge for a while. So after it got up to about 10%, we can give it a quick check on the camera here so you can see. So as I was saying, if you do this right, it will be still water resistant. It won't be factory specifications, but at least it's better than having a cracked screen. And if it is cracked, it isn't waterproof anyway. And I would argue that these phones are not waterproof to begin with, even though that could be debated all day long. I would argue that they are merely water resistant. So if you get a little spritz on you or a little bit of a splash, you'll be fine. But if you go diving with this thing, I think you're going to find it won't stay on for long. So hope this was helpful for somebody out there, and if you liked it, like and subscribe, and I'll put a link to the other S8 video in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye bye now.